In off the moors, down through the mist band, God-cursed Grendel came greedily loping. The bane of the race of men roamed forth, hunting for prey in the high hall. Welcome to Hot Takes on the Classics. My name is Maeda, and I'm joined by Tim McIntosh for a discussion of Beowulf, which was our opening quote, Beowulf. And Tim, tell us about Beowulf.
Emily, I'm going to start with a question. I want you to fill in the blank on this, please.
Okay.
Beowulf was one of this famous author from the 20th century's favorite books. Can you make a guess about who it might have been?
I actually do know this. J.R.R. Tolkien.
J.R.R. Tolkien. He loves Beowulf.
He loves Beowulf. He
really does. And he was quite the scholar. Apparently in Beowulf scholarship, there's kind of B.T. and A.T. because of a famous couple of essays that he wrote before Tolkien and after Tolkien. He just changed the view of Beowulf. So here we are, Emily. We have kind of entered in this season on war a new era. We've gone from the ancient world, and now we're kind of at the beginning of the medieval world, but we're kind of sticking with heroic epics like the Iliad, which we discussed earlier, like the Aeneid, which we discussed earlier. This is a much shorter epic, Beowulf, but it's still a heroic piece of poetry about one of the great heroes, this time of the Scandinavian world, Beowulf. So a little bit about the poem.
Right, that's an important thing,
between the
right?
8th
it's a poem.
and 11th centuries. That's right. So we're talking between 400 and 700 years after Augustine's City of God, the last podcast that we covered, Augustine's City of God. Some people think the poem is much, much older, like it existed in, oral form, and it was recited much longer before it was written down. Other people are like, no, it was probably written around 1000. That's what Tolkien thinks. Tolkien thinks it was written around 1000 by one great poet. Other people say, no, you guys, Beowulf was written by a bunch of people. It was written by kind of committee through the years, but not Tolkien. Tolkien's like one great poet wrote it. Sorry, Emily, you were saying.
Well, he wants to think that, doesn't he? Likes that idea. But it shares that similarity with Homer, right?
Yes.
That it's oral in its makeup, right? Like writing is different. It was shared around fires. Yes.
That's exactly right. That's right.
So
it was shared around fires. And
there has even been the same claim made about Homer that, the Iliad isn't written by one, right? So this same discussion goes with a lot of these old texts, especially the ones that are based around orality.
And I'm totally open to the idea that a committee or like generations put this thing together. I think the strongest counter argument to that is basically great literature is not written by committee. It's usually written by one person. And maybe it's kind of like reshaped through the years, but I think that's the strongest counter argument. And of course, like Tolkien goes into all sorts of like textual criticism and things like that.
Yeah.
But for the superficial man, namely me, I just think like poetry written by one person is better than poetry written by a committee. Okay. Our hero, Beowulf, the namesake for the book, is an Anglo-Saxon. Now, what does that mean? That's like a term for white people that gets bandied about all the time. The Anglo-Saxons were people who settled in Britain between the 5th century and the 10th century. And they're kind of a mashup of a bunch of different people: Germanic migrants, Celtic inhabitants, Vikings, Danish. They all kind of made the voyage, or they crossed Northern Europe, and they settled in a land that became known as Angleland, or to our ear today, England.
Yeah, I mean, the Anglo-Saxons are, not nice people.
They're not nice people.
It is funny. It is funny now that it's like, WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. It's funny that it's like a term for upper class nudiness, because the Anglo-Saxons were far from that.
Right, very much so.
They're barbarian.
Very much so. This poem is a hero epic, as I mentioned. Mm-hmm. It's like a long love song in praise of its hero, Beowulf. And Beowulf, we love this guy, Emily. Friend of the show. Beowulf is honorable. He's loyal to his people. He's incredibly strong. During one scene in the book, Beowulf swims across the ocean carrying 30 sets of armor on his back. Like, he's just stacked. He's ripped. Nobody can beat him. But he's also really honorable.
Right.
And so there's another scene set in contrast with this guy, Unferth. Don't be Unferth. He's one of the Danish guys. He's really proud and resentful. And Beowulf just kind of leans back and lets him like just sound like a clown. And then Beowulf goes and he defeats the enemy. Yeah. But let's get into the actual plot of Beowulf. And then I'm going to come back and I want to talk a little bit about what the poetry actually sounds like. So our story begins with a monster. This terrible creature named Grendel is attacking over and over the great hall of King Hrothgar in Denmark.
That's such a great name.
I want to hear Hrothgar. Like, it sounds like so kind of uber masculine. Hrothgar. So Grendel is just tormenting the people of Hrothgar. And let's hear a little bit of the poetry from someone I'm going to talk about later, Seamus Heaney. This is Seamus Heaney, an Irish poet and playwright who did a translation of Beowulf. Let's listen to the description of the god-cursed brute Grendel.
Suddenly then the god-cursed brute was creating havoc. Greedy and grim, he grabbed 30 men from their resting places and rushed to his lair, flushed up and inflamed from the raid, blundering back with the butchered corpses.
So, right there, suddenly the god-cursed brute was wreaking havoc. Greedy and grim, he grabbed 30 men from their resting places. That is a little sample of how this poetry works, Emily.
Yes.
It's not based, like, there are some rhymes in there, but most of the kind of beautiful sound is not from rhymes. It's from repeated consonants, alliteration, that show up back to back. They're kind of stacked together in lines. Greedy and grim, he grabbed.
Now,
it's a beautiful sounding oral presentation. Go ahead.
You said it's beautiful, but I mean, for a great portion of European history, it wasn't considered beautiful, right? When the emphasis was on rhyming, they saw this as kind of brutal and guttural. Do you know what I mean? I think it's beautiful now. But like that heavy consonant sound wasn't really considered refined. I mean, that's actually part of what Tolkien pushes on when he says, you're missing the beauty of this, because it is beautiful. I agree with you. But it wasn't always valued, right? Because it doesn't have the dum, the dum, the dum. It's dot, 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 right?
Yeah, it's coarse sounding. It's kind of staccato at points.
It is. It's staccato. And I love it. I love it too. There's something so in the chest about it. But, you know, that was part of...
I love that little phrase.
Don't you feel it right here in your chest when you say those things?
Yeah.
But it's not the refinement of French. So, you know, this is prior to the Norman invasion, but the French did not like this. And when English sort of is influenced by French, this is brushed aside as like not refined enough, you know? So I think we should make that point that we think it's beautiful. And to me, I mean, I love it, but you know who else loves it? Another poet,
Who's that?
Gerard Manley Hopkins. He goes back to Beowulf too, because he's like the Anglo-Saxon is what
I didn't
know
that.
Yes, and that's his poetry has all of that sense of the strength of the consonant, you know, tut, 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 like that rhythm to it. Yeah. It's very rhythmic. Anyway, but that's why it's
very
great.
Rhythmic.
That's why, and I love this Seamus Heaney. But
we're foreshadowing one of my hot takes, lukewarm take, that we'll talk about at the end of the show. No, it's great. So poem opens, Grendel, this monster, is attacking the Danish hall, and the Danish people are absolutely terrified. But thankfully, our great hero, who's living in what we would consider like modern Sweden, Beowulf, hears of their plight, and he and his men get on their boats, and they come across to Hrothgar's hall. Upon reaching the hall, Beowulf declares his intention to fight Grendel without weapons. So right there, Emily, like, this is part of the heroic refrain.
So similar.
Beat Grendel with a sword and a spear and a shield. I'm a little bit more powerful than that. I'm just going to do it with my own bare hands. So he makes this offer to King Hrothgar. The king, of course, accepts. And then that night, the guards go to sleep. Beowulf is with the guards in the great hall. He stays awake. And let's hear one more sample from Seamus Heaney's Beowulf.
Then out of the night came the shadow stalker, stealthy and swift. The hall guards were slack, asleep at their posts, all except one.
There, Emily, you can hear it. The alliteration with all those S's. Out of the night came the shadow stalker, stealthy and swift. The guards were slack, asleep at their posts. Beautiful. I love it. So, Beowulf and Grendel go to battle. Beowulf, of course, triumphs. He tears off Grendel's arm, fatally wounding the monster, and, so we think, all is saved.
But
not all is saved, Emily.
I know.
Not all is saved, because there's another monster in the deep of this hall, and that monster is Grendel's mom.
Yes.
And Grendel's mom is extremely mad. So angry.
So angry. Yeah. And now Beowulf has to go somewhere else. Crazy. Which, I mean, we should talk about this at the end. Because now, not in the hall, but.
Right. It's underwater. So, after Grendel's mother attacks, killing one of Hrothgar's men, Beowulf's like, really? I got to do this again? Great. I'll do it again. So, he goes to where Grendel's mother lives, which is an underwater cave, and they fight underwater, and Beowulf, attacking, repelling Grendel's mother, finds a great sword in her lair, and he uses it to kill Grendel's mother. A second monster is vanquished. Incredible. The men are saved, and we reach kind of like an intermission in the book. This is an interesting part about this story for me, Emily, is that after the killing of Grendel's mother, there's a 50-year transition.
Right.
Beowulf goes home. He becomes the king of the Geats. This is, again, like modern-day Sweden. He rules for many years, and then 50 years after his triumph over Grendel and Grendel's mother, Beowulf faces a final challenge. Emily, I want you to listen to this and tell me if this plot sounds at all familiar to a story that we know from the 20th century. The final challenge that Beowulf faces is a fire-breathing dragon who awakes and begins terrorizing his people because of a beautiful stolen goblet. Does that sound at all familiar to a story that you know? Tell me, what is it?
Might it be The Hobbit?
It's The Hobbit. So Tolkien loved Beowulf, and he was not afraid to kind of like borrow a bit of plot, because this is the story of The Hobbit.
A lot of it. The emphasis on the sword and which sword is able to kill, that is a big theme in The Lord of the Rings. What about, there's so much that populates Tolkien's world from this poem.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And also
so
Lewis.
Much.
There is, which is it? Voyage of the Dawn Treader with Eustace, where Eustace also wakens a dragon, right? So this poem is highly evocative to the early fantasy writers of the 20th century.
Very much so.
Yeah.
Beowulf confronts the dragon in battle, kills the dragon, but Emily, he suffers a fatal wound in the process. And it's really, I think even today, when you realize that Beowulf is going to die, it's really, it's sad. It's jarring because he's been nothing but heroic and strong, and he seems invincible. Lo, he is not invincible.
Right. Well, and the end of the book, I mean, the end of the poem, it is a question. Should he have fought the dragon? It is really a question because they say the women mourn and say, now our kingdom is going to be left without a king. And now we're going to be attacked by our enemies, and there will be no one here to protect us. Right? So it's sort of a question. And who's it? Wiglaf, his young comrade, because they're like, you're too old, Beowulf. And Wiglaf says, no, we'll stand by him. But yeah, there is like this real deep sadness at the end of Beowulf that kind of, it's just fascinating because the heroicism is tempered with this, like, all flesh is grass, you know? It springs up and dies. It's tempered with that. The heroism is not quite as triumphant.
Exactly. This is one of the things that Tolkien loves so much about this book is like the mindset of the people. There's a sense that they know all flesh is grass, all will die, and they embrace it with this like great strength and humility.
Yes.
He loves it about the people.
That's in his big essay, The Monsters and Its Critic, right? He says that. Like,
exactly.
They look into the dark and they still just go forward anyway.
I know. I love it. It's such a compelling thing that he states. It's worth reading that essay just for that section. So, Emily, Beowulf dies. He's mourned by his people. He's given a grand funeral pyre. His body is cremated, and they erect a headstone in his memory. It's a wonderful, tragic close to a wonderful, tragic poem. Now, here's the question before we get to my hot take.
Okay, good.
There's a question for first-time readers of Beowulf, which is, how exactly are we supposed to read this thing?
Yeah.
Because there's a kind of conflict in the book, and the conflict is between two worldviews.
It absolutely is.
The old worldview, right, is this kind of pagan, heroic, triumphant view. It's a view that, in some ways, going back to Augustine's City of God, Augustine begrudgingly gives some respect to, but also is like, man, these heroic virtues tap out.
Exactly. Thank you. I was going to make that point.
So, on the one hand, Beowulf is that kind of figure, but inserted in that kind of pagan honor code are very clear Christian references.
Absolutely.
So, this kind of raises a question. So, an example, like Cain, the brother of Abel, is mentioned in the book, and original sin. Grendel's mother seems to be something like original sin. So there are all sorts of biblical allusions in the story. So it's this kind of conflict between the old pagan hero virtue outlook and the forthcoming Christian ethic of humility, love, anti-violence.
Yes. And, we didn't say this in the City of God, but this is a pressing question for the early church itself. There are a lot of early Christian saints, like St. Martin of Tours, like St. Eustace, all through Christian history, but they're soldiers fighting for the pagan Roman Empire. And at some point they say, we can't do this. We have to follow Christ. Some of them are martyred for that, right? But it's held up as a virtue that they lay aside the pursuit of worldly honor. They lay aside manly virtue, strength, and dominance for this new way. And this culture, this Anglo-Saxon culture, is struggling with the same thing. How do we have a sense of virtue and honor and manly strength within this new ethic that says we have to lay down our life for our brother? So St. Martin of Tours gives away his army cloak to a poor beggar, and the poor beggar turns out to be Christ. But that is at play here with this new cultural setting that Christianity is finding its way within. What do we value more?
Right.
Do we value
there's one way
the
of
old honor
reading
code?
Beowulf, and I strongly
it's a
encourage
question.
you, if you've not read
Beowulf is
read
a
Beowulf.
prototype
You will
of the knight.
love it.
It
might take a little
knight.
time to get into kind of like the rhythm and side text, but it's so good. Say it again, Emily.
Sorry, I just said Beowulf is a prototype of the coming Christian knight, isn't it?
That is one way that you can read Beowulf. It's like an allegory for Christianity. So Beowulf, this great, honorable, strong man who can rescue us from our sin, who protects his church. You could read Beowulf that way, and you could read the monsters as embodying original sin, or maybe the dragon is representative of Satan. Like, that's one way in which you can read it. Emily, I don't think that's the best way to read it. I think you kind of like, you really have to force a reading on the book if you do that. So I have a suggestion for a better way to read Beowulf, and that is, Beowulf is kind of a poetic mashup. It's like a mashup song. So at my gym, they love to play these kind of high energy mashup songs in which they take two songs that have the same syncopation or the same, like,
same
I don't
rhythm.
know what you would call it. You're the musician. Same rhythm.
Same rhythm.
And they mash them together. So, okay, I've got an example. Actually, let's play a little example. Listen for Roy Orbison's Anything You Want. This is probably like 1950s, early 60s, and it's mashed up with Snoop Dogg.
Oh, dear. Okay.
So right there, you can hear like these two different tunes coming together, and you kind of hear Roy Orbison 1 minute, and then you hear Snoop Dogg's beat the next minute, right?
Yep.
You kind of go back and forth.
Yep.
I think that's the right way to read this book.
I agree with
I don't think it's a Christian allegory. I think it's going back and forth between like pagan world, Christian world.
Absolutely.
Pagan world, Christian world. The Northern Europeans of this time, they're trying to reconcile their pagan beliefs with Christian beliefs. And so that's what Beowulf is. It's an old pagan story, and it's mashed together with Christian concepts. Some people even think monks added Christian elements to an existing pagan story. Maybe true.
I don't think that holds true, because I think just like I don't think it should be read as a Christian allegory at all. But the sense that there's something already different about Beowulf than earlier Anglo-Saxons is for sure the case. For instance, he goes to defend. He doesn't go to attack, right? I mean, the Anglo-Saxons were marauders. Like, they marauded and took.
They went on the attack.
Right. So Beowulf goes to defend, which would be in support of a just war, right? He says sometimes you must use force. So
Nice.
I think that sense of them like trying to work out, okay, the Romans had to do it. How do we understand these virtues in light of Christianity? Now the Anglo-Saxons are trying to figure it out. How do we do this, right? We valued these certain things. How are these now valued within an ethic, a new way of... What do we do with violence?
I love it. Emily?
Yes.
It's time for my dual-pronged hot take.
Are you allowed to have two hot takes?
I'm breaking new territory.
Okay.
Breaking new ground.
Okay, let's hear them.
J.R.R. Tolkien was such a fan of Beowulf that he made his own translation.
Yep.
Came out sometime in the last 10 years. Here's my hot take.
Okay.
If you're a first-time reader of Beowulf, don't start with Tolkien's translation.
I agree with you.
Right?
Yeah, I agree with you.
It's like very technically precise. It's written for academics.
Yes.
It's written kind of like wanting to really capture the essential text and convey it. But oftentimes in poetry, when that's done, sometimes you lose the poetry of it. You need a translator who has a little bit more, who's willing to take more liberties. And that person, Emily, is Seamus Heaney.
I agree with you.
Start with Seamus Heaney's translation. Irish poet and playwright, and he also loved Beowulf. And a lot of the things that you were talking about the kind of tone and the kind of rough guttural language of Beowulf, Seamus Heaney's like, right, that stuff is great. Not this kind of purified English, like, beauty.
Yeah.
No, we want that original kind of like gritty, guttural alliteration, and that's how he makes his translation. I think it's just lovely. So let me just give you one line that will kind of articulate the difference between Heaney's translation and Tolkien's. So there's a description of the ringed armor that Beowulf wears to battle. Here's Heaney's translation. He translates that ringed armor as mail shirt gray as hoarfrost. Tolkien, the gray corselet.
You know, you just have to think sometimes. Sometimes when you're a deep lover and champion of something, you may not be its best advocate because you love it almost. I think it's a little bit that way for Tolkien, you know? He's too close to it. And Heaney he can't see it. Heaney is a Gaelic speaker, and I think that really helps him out. You know?
Absolutely.
The Heaney translation has the Old English right next to it, which is really kind of fun to look at if you don't have to
and try
read
to
it.
sound it out every once in a while.
Yeah. Have you heard a reading of it? It's fun to hear.
Is it really?
Oh,
There's
it's
probably
beautiful.
one online we can commend to our readers.
Beautiful. Justin Jackson's reading of the opening of Beowulf. I recommend.
Oh, that's good. Okay. People can find that online.
Yes.
Okay.
I want to hear your other
Here's
hot
the second
take.
part of my hot take. This is going to match up exactly with what we've been saying. If you're a teacher or a parent teaching Beowulf, read it aloud. Read it aloud. Slow down in your classroom and do it orally, because this is something I believe in very strongly. And my belief in it, Emily, comes from the fact that I taught Shakespeare. I love Shakespeare. I've acted Shakespeare. I've directed Shakespeare. And Shakespeare on the page and Shakespeare spoken aloud or acted out
100%
are completely different experiences. Of course, reading on the page is an absolute pleasure. It's freaking Shakespeare. But acted out, spoken and acted publicly and communally, it is an absolutely breathtaking experience. And I think that this poem would benefit tremendously by an attempt to read it aloud so you can hear that beautiful prose. Emily, you agree with me, I think.
I am in so much agreement with you. This poem, I completely agree with you. This poem, just like, I mean, honestly, the Iliad, the Odyssey, all of those poems are benefit read aloud. You understand them better. And this one,
do.
for sure, with all the fun consonant sounds, it's just should be read aloud. That's a great hot take. Read it aloud.
I love it. I'm going to close with a few lines read aloud, just so you can kind of hear a little bit of the poetry. His father's warrior were wound round his heart with golden rings, bound to their prince by his father's treasure, So young men build the future, wisely open-handed in peace, protected in war. So warriors earn their fame, and wealth is shaped with a sword.
Beautiful.
Emily,
Love it.
thanks for being here again for Hot Takes on the Classics.
Thanks, Tim. That was great. And great Beowulf.
We want to thank Clark Stefanik, our producer, True North, our platform. If you like this show, you're going to like other shows on the platform, like the Classical U podcast. Go check it out. And thanks for our music, which was written and performed by Tom Hagerman.